Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be discussing a bill in the state of Nevada that's aimed at cutting down on teen truancy. We'll also be discussing a story about why one prenatal treatment is going up significantly in cost, and a man who was given a very large bill after being held in prison for a number of years. That coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to episode 196 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you to think outside the box. It's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, we are going to be getting into a few different stories from around the country here. I think we're actually sticking to the U.S. this week.
For once, we actually didn't go over to the U.K., which we have a habit of doing.
Picking on other countries, we'll be dealing with the problems that are right here.
It wasn't a slow news week, so...
Well, anyways, we are going to be getting into a story about a drug that, because of the government interference, is going from just a few pennies or a few dollars to thousands of dollars.
It's very significant, especially if you're an expecting mother. So.
Yeah, and you don't want a premature baby. And this is all government intervention and going through this FDA process and giving monopolies to certain drug companies.
The government could make things in healthcare cost more.
Wonder if it has to do with any lobbyists out there. We'll be getting into that story. We're also going to be getting into a story about an election. I mean, are elections, do they really matter? Do people think about who they're voting for? Can a dead man be elected? I think they can. We'll be getting into that, as well as the story about prisoners' wages. If you work in a prison and you're in there for 30, 40 years, should you leave and be stuck with a $500,000 bill? I don't know. I kind of do like the idea of restitution, but then again...
Not really paying the victim. You're
just
not
paying the victim,
for your
you're paying the state. Anyways, we'll be discussing that. But first, let's get into truancy, Nick. I know it sounds dry to just throw out there and talk about. The story we have is a little bit humorous, but it gets into a really important subject. Here in New Hampshire, we recently just passed a law in the past couple of years. A couple of years ago. It's going into effect right now. And it's really having an effect on schools of forcing kids to go to school who don't want to go to school. It used to be that if you were 16 and your parents agreed, you could drop out.
Right.
You didn't want to be in school anymore, you could drop out. Now in New Hampshire, as well as most of the states, require mandatory education until 18. Even if you and your parents know you're not going to graduate, they force you to go anyways. Here in New Hampshire...
Going until you're 18 doesn't mean getting past freshman year or sophomore year.
Since the bill went into effect, actually... in New Hampshire, we're calling people back. They're calling people back who had dropped out.
I recall being in middle school, and there was somebody who was almost 18 there.
Yeah, so this is what they do. A kid who's not going to graduate, has no interest in graduating, getting all Fs, still requiring them to come to school and waste their time, waste tax dollar money, waste the teacher's time and all the rest of the students' time, and they're not going to get a diploma anyways.
Right. And, if you really wanted to, if you thought this strategy would be successful, simply extending the age at which kids could drop out, I mean, I guess you could...
Force them until they get a diploma. How about that?
Or until they're 21, right?
Sure.
I mean...
Well, anyways, let's get into the story, and then we'll discuss...
This is coming out of Nevada, but what they're doing here is the Clark County School District is hoping to tackle truancy with a large bill tying incentives such as teen driver's licenses and parents' hunting licenses to school attendance. So what they're going to do here is basically require proof of attendance or graduation in order for teenagers under the age of 18 to get a driver's license. And if a kid is being truant, then their parents are going to face possibly other penalties too, and not just not being able to get a hunting or fishing license. It looks like they'll also be court-ordered to attend counseling sessions or perform community service. Those are the parents. And let's remember that there are some teenagers out there that are just, they're not going to listen to their parents, no matter what their parents do. They may not even listen to the police if the police are involved in a truancy case, which this bill would do. So you're punishing the parents. Okay, that's all well and good, I guess, but wouldn't it make more sense, if you're going to support a bill like this, to go after the kid? I mean, if you really want to force their hand,
well,
just say...
that's the driver's license piece.
Right. Well, it's not forcing their hand. Either say you go to school or you perform 50 hours of community service a week, or you go to jail.
Nick, they're not going to go to school. They're not going to perform the community service.
Right.
What I'm saying here is, okay, we have this public education system. we have budgets that are like they're being cut. We have bloated state budgets, huge deficits all over the country. I don't think there's any states that have a balanced budget right now. And we're forcing people to go to school that don't want to, at the cost of everybody else. When you put one teenager kid, the one teenager in a classroom, a 17-year-old who doesn't want to be in school, and you force him to be in there, are all the other kids going to be getting their education as well? No, of course not. That kid's goofing off. He's taking away from the lesson, or she, and completely undermining the class. Why force someone to do something they don't want to do?
Yeah, I can. Well, they're not. Yeah, I mean, the kids who are going to drop out at 16, and I'll agree, it's a really bad idea.
Horrible idea.
But the kids who are going to drop out at 16, they're not going to, in light of rules like this, if they're made to attend until they're 18, they're not going to get A's or B's or even C's. They're probably not even going to graduate. Just because you have to be in a school building for 7 hours out of the day doesn't mean you have to do anything.
No, you're going to sell drugs, you're going to goof off, you're going to skip class, you're going to undermine the lessons, you're going to be pulling other kids that could be doing well away from the
and you're wasting the faculty's time, you're wasting just resources when you consider that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but when you consider that a low dropout rate would be 10%. I think I've seen around here it tends to run more like 20. And I'm not saying dropping out's a good thing. It's certainly not.
And it's bad for society as a whole too, because then you have a bunch of people who have no working skills.
Well, yeah, that's true. But you're not going to fix that problem by simply making them stay in the school building for another 2 years, distracting teachers and draining off the already strained budget or passing that on to taxpayers with higher taxes. Just as a feel-good thing. These kids are not interested. I'm sorry. Some people just aren't going to make good choices.
School isn't for everyone. It never has been for everyone, Nick. Some people will be fine working in their dad's mechanic shop, taking it over for them, and that'll be okay for them. They don't... yes, it's a very good idea to get a good education, but it's not for everyone. I'm sorry. It just isn't. And it's time for society to accept that. It would be nice for everyone in America to get a doctorate, who would serve people food if that happened? I mean, not everybody can have an upper white-collar job. I'm sorry. It's a fact of the matter. It's feel-good stuff. It's kind of like saying, let's make the minimum wage $150 an hour and we'll all be rich. Feels good, doesn't it? But I'm sorry, that's not how the world works. Forcing people to be in school when they don't want to be, it doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't make sure that they get an education, doesn't make sure they get a diploma. It just forces them to be in school a little bit longer. School isn't for everyone. I think that as a society, especially with these budget cuts and these budget crises, it's time for us to recognize and accept that. Why are we just refusing to even entertain the idea that some people want to do manual labor and will be better with manual labor?
Yeah, and somebody does have to do it. And in New Hampshire, I can remember. I remember high school faculty complaining when this similar legislation was proposed here in New Hampshire, because they did not want to have to teach 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who didn't want to be there. It doesn't make any sense. And I guess in New Hampshire anyway, there are some alternative programs as part of what they're proposing here in Nevada. But if you're going to let a kid take, vocational classes about metalworking or auto shop, whatever you're going to have them do, that's all well and good, I guess. But why not let them just go get a job and get some on-the-job training? If they're going to be doing manual labor, and unless you're just a genius and your parents are rich, maybe you're going to actually start a business or something. Very few dropouts do that. So 95 to 99% of you are going, if you choose to drop out, are going to be doing some kind of menial or manual labor. There might be some skills involved, but you're not, mechanics can make pretty good money, and you do need to know things.
Well, there's a lot of manual labor, Nick, that can make a very good money. There's a lot of, my brother didn't go to college, and he makes more money than I did, and I'm in a master's program. I mean, just because you're highly educated doesn't mean you're going to make more money. A lot of manual labor jobs make way more money.
There's skill involved.
Of course, and it takes time to build that skill.
I don't know how
a regular classroom setting isn't always the place you're going to get it.
Right. I'm not going to be an electrician. I don't plan on doing that. I wouldn't. It's not like something you can just do. You know, I wouldn't recommend it. You might be
need
able to
on-the-job training.
Right.
You need an
but if you want to do
apprenticeship.
the wiring in your house, nah, I really wouldn't recommend that. Have an electrician do it. I mean, so there are a lot of things, a lot of these manual jobs, these blue collar jobs that kids who don't finish high school get. Well, yeah, they do require knowledge, but not everybody wants to sit through a history class or sit through a science class that they're never going to use.
No.
So, I know it goes against the grain of what we're told. I mean, now they're basically telling you, oh, well, you have to get a college degree to just be an average worker. I'm sorry, but that doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense, actually, when you get right down to it. So how about instead of teaching people a whole bunch of crap they don't want to need, aren't going to use, how about just giving them the tools they need to do their job? There's nothing wrong with a liberal arts education or getting a bachelor's or a master's degree or, hell, even getting a doctorate. But if what you want to do is work on cars or be a contractor, there's really, maybe sure get a college degree as backup, but there's really no reason to really be that focused on higher education.
Well, the education system in general, Nick, I think you alluded to all these useless classes or quote-unquote useless. I know they do have some meaning, but a lot of the people in them aren't paying attention, so they're not getting the information. The whole education system needs to be dramatically restructured and focused on a changed world. I mean, we're still trying to put square pegs into round holes and force people to come out society, people to fit into society in a certain way when it's just clearly isn't working.
And there's that, and there's really sort of a one-size-fits-all education. Basically, what public high schools have become in this country, and the private ones are probably the same way to a larger extent.
Well, it's education in general, largely public. No,
but you've got basically a course of general education that focuses on preparing kids for, a post-secondary education at a liberal arts college.
Yeah.
And what if kids don't want to do that? I mean, we don't have very much choice in our education system.
But not everybody can do it. That's another point, Nick. What if they don't? What if they don't want to do it? And B, the real horror would be, what if they all decide to do it? What if everybody decides to take out huge student loans and go get that liberal arts education? Wow, that would really suck for society. So, I mean, think about it. What if everyone really did go do that, Nick? Society would start to fall apart, or we'd have to count on more immigrants and open up the border, which would also work. But then we're giving them the goal of go get a liberal arts education as well. It doesn't work for everyone. I'm sorry. Let's be honest about it. It's a feel good to say that. Anyways, we do need to move on from this, but I also did want to mention that these alternative programs, forcing people to go into counseling if they're truant or they want to drop out or something along those lines, well, guess what? That's very costly as well. And when we're all going bankrupt, maybe that's something that we can afford to let people do their own thing and be a little bit more free if it's costing us this much money. How about that?
Right.
They'll learn their lessons.
Right.
Most of them will eventually learn, oh, I need to go get an education.
Go get a GED.
I need a GED, and then I need to go find an apprenticeship, or maybe I need to go to some community college.
Frankly,
eventually.
if you're not going to college, I'm not recommending that kids drop out here.
No, of course
But
not.
if you're not going to college, Toby, I really don't think employers, if employers are requiring pretty much all of them require high school diploma / GED.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter which one it is.
Well, Nick, most people will end up going back eventually, but forcing them to when they're not ready doesn't always work. Anyways, we need to move on. If you have different thoughts, we'd love to hear it. But let's talk about elections, Nick, because part of the whole mess we found ourselves in with the education system is because of the elections and elected so-called representatives to make decisions about what kind of a society we're going to run here. And I've said for years, Nick, that elections, well, they don't really mean much, because when the people go to the polls, they're just checking off the box, the name that looks good to them, or the red team or blue team, Democrat, Republican, some name recognition is in there. But for the most part, it's not educated people going to the polls and really, really being mindful about who they're voting for. Let's be honest about it. Have you ever voted in, especially a small, like say for city council, school board, if you really educated yourself about all the different candidates? Few people do, but most people don't. Case in point, this coming from, Bennington. I think this is up in Maine, where Kenneth Dudley has handedly been re-elected as the town's road commissioner on Friday. One problem, though, Dudley died more than a month ago. He was running unopposed, and it was too late to remove his name from the ballot, bureaucratic rules and all. And following his death last month, so they couldn't remove his name, so it was still on the ballot. Residents had the option of writing in other candidates, including some who actually campaigned for the write-in spot, but Dudley was still granted the most votes by quite the large margin here. I guess the next guy by well over 50%. Most people ended up checking him off. The more people voted for him than left the box blank. So I know it's just a road commissioner here, but it brings up the point, Nick, of
road commissioner is an important office.
It's probably
road agent. Yeah,
it is actually one of the real important ones there. But
especially this time of year when you're driving from town to town in New England.
There's huge potholes everywhere.
Well, but you notice the difference between certain towns. This town has nice roads. This town has crappy roads.
My point in this is not to talk about road commissioners necessarily. My point is to say that a lot of people who are voting there, the voting public, if you will, think they're doing a public service when they cast a vote. But they're not, if they're not educated about it. I just want to bring this out again, Nick. Let's not bring out the vote. Let's suppress the vote. If you don't know, if you're not educated when you go out and vote next time, please stay home. You're watering it down for everybody else. I just want to throw that out there, Nick. I think that trying to get a whole campaign of people out there to go and vote when they're not educated about who they're voting for really can be harmful to society. Because
that's a lot of our problem is that too many people vote. Yeah, I mean, when you hear these get out the vote campaigns or just go vote, well, no. If you
that just means vote for whoever's TV ad campaign, name recognition, whoever saturated the market with the most money most of the time. I don't mean to
make people feel bad, but don't just educate yourself about somebody's, like, if you don't understand, and I realize there are a lot of ins and outs. I'm not saying you have to be an expert in political science or anything like that for your opinion to be valid. But if you don't even fundamentally understand what the duties of that office entail, maybe you shouldn't be voting for whoever's running for it. If you don't actually know who's running, maybe you shouldn't be voting in that particular election. I mean, I leave things blank, Toby.
I don't even vote anymore.
I still do, and I'll vote in the state races, sometimes in the federal races if there's anybody I feel like voting for. But they don't throw your ballot out if you don't vote, if you don't fill all the check boxes. You can vote in just one race. So if there's one race where I care to vote for somebody and I don't really like either person in the other races, then I just won't vote for them. If I don't recognize the names, like when people are talking, I don't follow who's the county commissioner here in Cheshire County, Toby. I don't pay attention to that, so I don't vote. And a lot of times it's the same name on both sides for some of those offices that I don't know about. So apparently they're running unopposed.
But I think this is bigger than just small town offices, Nick. I think this runs all the way up to through the state and federal elections as well, of people just having a small amount of knowledge. Maybe they've heard some candidate's name and they like the sound of it, or maybe he's a Republican or a Democrat, so they really want to go and vote for that particular candidate, when really not knowing what they're voting for, what the policy actually means. If it's an incumbent, this is how incumbents get elected over and over again, because their name's on the ballot, and so people just check it off. Even though we've gone over poll numbers where in some, it ebbs and flows, but there have been cases where over 90% of the public would throw out all of Congress and the Senate and replace them with random people if given the opportunity. Yet over 90% of incumbents get reelected because their name is on the ballot, and people just check off names that are on the ballot. So if you're not going to educate yourself, please, let's not bring out the vote. Let's suppress it.
Well, let's suppress the uninformed vote. I'm not saying let's suppress the vote, but
suppress the uninformed vote. Yeah.
If you don't know, if you have no idea about public policy,
no, if you don't have a good idea, Nick,
and you know what,
not just no idea, a good idea.
Well, I see. I will encourage people who don't agree with me not to vote, but some people disagree there. But
I don't care if you agree with me or not necessarily, Nick. It's about this idea that you just have to get the masses out to the polls. If the masses don't know what they're talking about, they're going to make a bad decision. And chances are,
well, yeah, but that works for the incumbents. So the incumbents
I'm sorry, Nick,
would like
I don't look up all this information about the candidates, and that's why I don't vote half the time, because there's no one worth voting for anyways. So why am I going to go educate myself on these names and waste my time going out there when nothing's actually going to change? I find it all a scam, but that's just me.
It's not. You don't actually. I mean, I'm not going to say it's completely a scam, because certainly, I'm sure there are rigged elections in some limited cases, even here in the U.S.
It doesn't matter if it's rigged on purpose
Right.
for it's rigged
Well,
through
no,
what
but what I'm
society
saying
does
is it
to rig
can
it.
work, Toby. It doesn't mean
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
scam. It just means
It's worked real well, Nick.
it just means most of the electorate either doesn't agree with you or they're ill-informed and they're just checking. Like half of the people out there going to the polls, a lot of you guys are just either you just vote for somebody because of party affiliation without doing any homework and without even really checking into what these people propose to do, or I've met people who vote based on whose name sounds better.
Yeah, I
don't know who's
before,
right.
Nick. I'm not gonna lie, I've done it, and I actually almost.
Oh, that sounds like a nice name. Oh, what are you doing? This is an election.
When I was 18, that's what I did. I thought it was my duty, Nick. I'm doing my civil service. I'm going down to election day, and I'm gonna vote in that guy's name. He's a Democrat. I like them. They're blue. That's my favorite color. And so most of my parents were Democrats, so I got to do what they did, right? And I'm at college, and everyone here is a Democrat, so I'm gonna do that. Oh, and that guy's name is good too, so I'll vote for him. But what was I doing? I was watering down the vote. So, anyways, we're out of time on this segment. We've got a couple more stories I want to get into. I just wanted to throw that out there. It's not election season, so I'm sure I'll work on my Suppress the Uninformed Vote campaign in future shows. But
as we get closer and closer to election day,
gotta
probably be more and more.
I've got to go against the whole
process.
like MTV Rock the Vote campaign. But let's get into what the government's doing to make sure there's more premature babies in the world.
Well, what they did here is it's dealing with is the way you said it was funny, but it's really not a funny subject.
But that's what they're doing.
That is what they're doing. Basically, a drug used to treat high-risk pregnant women, people who are at a high risk for having premature births, has cost about $10 to $20 per injection. The drug's name is Makena. I guess it's a hormone treatment that started being used back in the 70s. They stopped using it for a while because there was bad press about hormone treatments, and then it came back in, I think, 2003. But it's been made really generically, and they're not FDA-approved shots. Well, thanks to FDA approval, which was granted exclusively to KV Pharmaceutical of St. Louis, now that company is the only company that's allowed to produce the drug. They've got the FDA approval. And so it's going to cost $1,500 for a shot, which will bring the cost for a total course of treatment up to about $30,000.
Wow.
$10 or $20 a shot to $1,500 a shot.
Now, if
about
I'm
a 100% pricing.
No,
I mean, a
15,000.
100-fold, a 100-time price
if I'm
increase.
a low-income woman without insurance, guess what? I'm not getting those shots.
Right. Even if you do have insurance, your insurance company is going to get it's going to get diluted, so it's not going to hurt you as an individual as much. But you've got people on government health care, you've got people on private health care, but the rest of us are paying into those same premium pools. So what we're dealing with here is we're basically all getting screwed so that this one company can make a lot more money.
Because they lobbied the government enough. And that's what it comes down to, Nick. And
the only article here, the only response, the only statement by the pharmaceutical company says, Makena can help offset some of those costs. The spokesperson for this pharmaceutical company said, these moms deserve the opportunity to have the benefits of an FDA-approved Makena.
Oh, they're so
which
kind.
the benefits are a 100-fold price increase.
Yeah, it goes from $10 to $1,500.
And this happens, this happens, they also point out, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is not involved in setting the price of the drugs it approves. Well,
they just give monopoly to a company who
right.
can then set whatever price they want.
Right, and the approval process is costly. I mean, in this case, most of the research and development and stuff have been done beforehand. I think they played around to make these doses. I guess the argument was the doses weren't as consistent, so I guess a lot of doctors are actually lobbying for FDA approval to be given to one major pharmaceutical company. But according to this story here, they were surprised by the price increase. Why would you be surprised that giving a monopoly privilege to one company to produce a drug that people desperately want? I mean, most women who are told they're at high risk for delivering prematurely and are told that there is an available treatment, especially if they've got insurance, they're going to want it, whether it costs $10 a shot or $1,000+ a shot. They're not going to care. So what this effectively does is it inflates medical prices. Government involvement in an industry
Yep.
can quite often inflate prices.
And
That's
this
what
is
we've
just
seen in
one
healthcare.
teeny instant of thousands.
Oh, this is. I'm not
thousands
saying
of
because of
examples.
this.
Right.
This is a good example.
Of thousands of other cases.
Right. The government is even before the healthcare overhaul legislation. We had already reached the point where more than half of healthcare spending was done by the government. So it was already more than half socialized as an industry anyway. And now we're just sliding to where the private market's going to be a small percentage of the healthcare market. And that's why it's so expensive, a big part of why it's so expensive.
Yay, government. All right, I got a couple of minutes to get into it, but I do want to touch on the story. Interesting subject because I agree with part of the premise, but I don't agree with how it's being handed down. Illinois seeks to seize prisoners' wages. Kensley Hawkins, 60, has saved more than $11,000 in Joliet prison in Illinois since the 1980s when he was incarcerated, making about $75 a month. That's about $2 a day for his work, it says later on the article here. And he was... but he has been sued by the state of Illinois, and the court has ruled that he owes $455,203.14 to cover the cost of his stay at the Statesville Correctional Center. It looks like this case is going to be going to the Illinois Supreme Court to decide if this is fair or not. Now, Nick, I am torn on this because on one sense, I think that, well, I don't think that victimless criminals should, I don't believe that there is such a thing as victimless crime. So let's just go in with the premise that prisoners should not be in jail if they have not harmed someone else. So let's take those away. I believe that prisoners should be paying restitution to whoever they hurt. Problem is, in this case, Nick, none of the money is going to the people who were hurt. I think in Hawkins' case, he says he killed someone, slayed a 65-year-old man. He's going to be in prison until 2028. The money he's earning should be going to the man's family who he slayed, in my opinion.
Yeah, that would make more sense. And it's also, I don't like the idea because they handed him a bill here, right? I mean, it's so,
yes.
I mean, what you're dealing with.
How's he supposed to pay for it?
Right. Well, that, and I don't like the idea that you've got a for-profit correctional system.
Yeah.
It's just not a good idea. If you've ever seen the movie Brazil, it was really weird and not very much fun to watch, but that was a big theme in that movie. It was a police state and you had to pay.
Real quick, I think it is important, we 30 seconds here to wrap up, that the reason this could be a very bad idea, Nick, is because the system was put in place to give people skills so that when they got out, they didn't reoffend and go rob places, so they had skills to work in prison. And if you're going to be taking away all their money, well, chances are it won't work out so well. They're more likely to go out in the world and rob instead of staying in prison, working, earning some money to get an apartment and etc., get back on their feet. So, wrong on many levels. I do like the idea of restitution, though. We're out of time. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Join us at freemindstv.com. In the meantime, have a good night.